I had a weird, I don't know if you ever had this, I had a weird phone call yesterday, and it's happened to me a couple of times, but a guy rings up, and his English isn't his first language, and the line's not great, and it's wardrobes fitted, and it's not, and then he says, and it just needs sort of stretching a bit to make it fit.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, okay, sorry, I'm sorry, I'm not, it's a bad line, didn't quite catch that. Could you say that again? So yeah. See, we had the wardrobes fitted, and we've had to roll the carpet back, and now it's rolled back again. It's not, where we had a cutout before. It's not quite. It's not. Is it? Can you sort of stretch it a bit to make and put grippers around to make it fit? I said, I'm sorry. I think we're talking across purposes. I'm a carpenter and cabinet maker, not a carpet fitter. And he said, what is it? Is it just like too small a job for you then?
What?
I said, no, it's just that I don't, I'm a carpenter. I make wardrobes and shelves and things. I don't do carpets. Oh, well, I looked at your website, he said. On that note, welcome back to the Measuring Up Podcast, the UK's first and, as far as we're concerned, favourite commercial joinery podcast. I'm Peter Millard, and as well as running a virtual 10-minute workshop for YouTube, I run a small but far from perfectly formed carpentry, cabinet making, and what the heck carpet fitting business in the no man's land of West London.
You'll have to be careful what you say there. You'll get loads of inquiries. And I'm Andy MacLellan, and I run a cabinet making joinery business thing up in Newcastle upon Tyne. And every couple of weeks we get together and we have a nice little chat about woodworking and running a small business and running a small workshop and the joys of self-employment, all from the perspective of the north of England and the south of England. And what is today's show about, Peter?
I think it's about carpet fitting, isn't it? Do you do carpet fitting then, Andy?
I am the world's worst. There's two jobs that I refuse to do, and even back in the handyman days, I refused to do them. And one was carpet fitting and one was plastering. I cannot plaster. And I cannot do carpet fitting. I've tried carpet fitting in my own house.
Yeah, I can do a lot of filling and sanding.
Oh, I'm expert on filling and sanding. But plastering, I mean, I've tried even on my own projects, it's like, oh, go on, I'll try my hand at it just in that little area and I'll try plastering up that section of wall. Honestly, I had one section of wall, a plasterer would have had it done in like 20 minutes. I was on it for best part of like 2 weeks or something, it was...
Yeah, I can just about do drywall...
Taping and...
Yankee-style drywall, taping and filling. But actual proper plastering, no, I don't know how you do it. I just don't know.
It doesn't make sense. It's an absolute dark art. And same with carpet fitting. Every time I sit in certain rooms and you look at the carpet that's intricately weaved around... the loo and the sink and then round little corners, and it's like, I can understand how you do one bit of it, but if I got that bit right, it would throw out the other bits. So it just makes no sense to me. No, I honestly...
Just leave it to somebody else completely.
Hats off to all the carpet fitters and plasterers out there.
Absolutely. And if there are any carpet fitters in West London who are in the need of a small job, I know a guy who needs a carpet stretching and refitting around a wardrobe that I didn't make.
Yeah, because we've got trades from all across the spectrum listening to the show now, which is really nice to know. We've got all sorts of people, electricians and general builders and bricklayers and all sorts of people who are providing feedback to the show. So welcome aboard, absolutely everyone. And if you're not a tradesperson and you just like to hear about what life is like behind the wheel of a small workshop, then a massive welcome to all of you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many obstacles in the road when you have a small workshop or a small business. That's one of the topics I wanted to sort of touch on today, because it's we get a lot of questions, a lot of inquiries about the mechanics of the woodworking side of things, glues and screws, joints and machinery and all that kind of stuff. But that's the easy part. The real challenge is finding the customers, keeping the customers, and keeping the business running on a relatively straight and narrow road, whilst weaving around all these obstacles and impediments that are seemingly thrown in our way for no good reason. I discovered today that I'm not going to be able to drive my van into central London. Not that I ever did, but there's an ultra-low emission zone that comes into force on the 8th of April, and I do not qualify. Of course, I could pay, because then all those nasty toxic emissions will go away, won't they? If you pay the extra £12.50 a day or whatever.
I think if you pay enough money, they just disappear, and it's just fairy dust comes out your exhaust. That's
right. You're fine. No, just pay us an extra £12.50 a day on top of the congestion charge and the T charge, and we'll turn a blind eye, kind of thing. So that comes in. I rarely go into the central London anyway, to be honest, to do that sort of stuff. But from October 2021, it will actually be across the whole of London between the North and South Circulars. So I will need to get another van or not be working by then.
Oh, is it down to the emissions of your specific vehicle then?
It's down to emissions generally, but my vehicle is non-compliant, so it's either had to be made. You can't make it compliant. It's down to the type of catalytic converter that it's got in it. It's not a Cat 6 compliant vehicle. So
wow,
that's that. There'll be lots of cheaper vehicles if you are out of London on the market in about a year or two, as people are trying to get rid.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's absolutely great. Interestingly, they're putting a similar thing in Newcastle, believe it or not.
Are they? Well, I was going to ask, actually.
I mean, at the minute, there's nothing like that. Obviously, there's no congestion zone or anything like that. But there are rumours at the minute that they're going to be implementing some sort of toll for crossing the river, for literally driving across the River Tyne.
Goodness.
Because obviously we've got a lot of bridges over the river, plus 2 tunnels, and that is a major congestion point in the city. And they're talking about putting some sort of toll or levy on crossing the river, from what I've heard. I don't know the full ins and outs of it. It was one of those things that I heard, it was getting bandied about in a kind of, we're discussing this as some sort of, and then I was chatting to someone else and they were like, oh no, it's coming in. It's definitely coming in. And I was like,
it's for
really?
Real.
That's crazy. I mean, for Newcastle, you can
understand it in London to a certain extent because there is a lot of traffic, and there's a lot of traffic, a lot of fumes, as we found out when I did my toxic fruit, I think it was, video. Stood behind my van with a little toxic meter working, and yes, it was, the emissions were pretty nasty, pretty fast.
I mean, I get it, and I get why they're doing this stuff, but sometimes I think they need to let people just catch up. It's not fair to turn around to however many hundreds of thousands of tradespeople and just say, right, either stump up or change your vehicle. I mean, at least give a...
Yeah. To be fair, to Transport for London, on the website, they do say you're subject to the ultra-low emission zone. From 8th of April, you need to pay the daily charge. Your options... and option number 1, of course, is the one that we would all go for. Avoid driving by walking, cycling, or using public transport. And they conveniently give a link for us to be able to plan our journey. Now, how much of the 3 cubic metres of crap I carry in the back of my van do you think I'll be able to take on public transport?
You should just try it.
Not very much.
That would make a brilliant video. Get the entire contents of the back of your van and just stand at a bus stop with it.
I should, actually. Yeah, that'd be great. That would be hilarious.
And just try and get on a bus and see what happens. And that would be a brilliant video.
Or upgrade your vehicle to meet the required ULEZ standards, or pay the daily charge. What a surprise. You can just pay your way out of it again.
It's basically just pay the daily charge, which is
fine for now. But, of course, when the ULEZ zone covers the whole of London between North and South Circular, you literally just by having the vehicle, you would end up having to pay the daily charge, whether you move it or not. So
ultimately, it just makes everything more expensive for the customer, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't really fix anything. It just puts the prices up for the customer, because everyone will have to put the prices up to cover this.
And I read somewhere that the vast majority of emissions emitted by a vehicle, so the vast majority of emissions that are generated during a vehicle's lifetime, are actually created at the time of manufacture. So we want to stop using cars, not we want to stop making cars and vehicles, not necessarily stopping from using them.
Yeah.
I say, I do get it. I do understand it. It's all about the pollution in our immediate environment. And as we've touched on briefly before, electric vehicles are obviously the way to go for city travel, if that's what you need. But it's just time after time after time we get these impediments in our way of carrying out our trade.
I think with a lot of this sort of stuff, and it comes back down to everything from GDPR and cookie policies and all of that side of things. The article that I published recently about the Moss EU VAT thing, which I don't know if you saw that or not, but basically some rulings were brought in back in January 2015. It probably doesn't really affect many people listening to this show, but it certainly affects us potentially if we ever want to sell digital plans and downloads and things like that via our websites, which is often a thing that people like us will do.
Yeah.
And the EU brought in some legislation back in January 2015, basically meaning that there is no VAT threshold. Bearing in mind we're both under the VAT threshold, so we don't charge VAT.
Yeah.
But that no longer applies for digital downloads. So you would have to charge VAT. And not only that, they complicate it further by saying that the VAT rate has to be paid not depending on our VAT rate, but depending on the VAT rate of the person who's buying the plan. And that would potentially mean registering for VAT in 28 separate EU countries.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
Filing quarterly VAT returns in 28 separate EU countries. So they brought in this new thing called the Moss scheme, mini one-stop shop. Don't get me started about that. Anyway, and that basically simplified it slightly, but then the UK revoked it all on the 1st of January this year and put in a 10 grand or a €10 threshold. So at least we don't have the 85 grand threshold that you have for any other business. But instead, for this one thing, if you're selling digital downloads, it's a €10,000 threshold. But okay, at least there's a threshold there. But depending on what happens with Brexit, we might lose that because the 10K threshold is an EU-wide thing. It still doesn't help people in America selling digital plans to anyone in Europe. I've yet to see anyone in America charging me VAT. So they're obviously just kind of brushing over it and either ignoring it or they don't know about it. But the whole point of... gone off on a bit of a tangent.
What a surprise.
Yeah. This ruling came in because of Amazon selling their Kindle books via Luxembourg, who had really low VAT rates.
Yeah.
So the EU's response to that was, right, okay, we'll prevent that by changing it so that it's not dependent on where the company's located, it's dependent on where the buyer is located. And they switched the whole VAT regime upside down.
And as a consequence, little guys like us get caught in the net.
Yeah. And Amazon, they'll just either pay the fine and don't care because they've got so much money, or they'll get their massive legal teams to just come up with other tax loopholes to get around it. They don't care, but it massively impacts the likes of us, and it's these little things that we're constantly running into as small businesses, like congestion charges and parking problems, and it's becoming very, very difficult. I mean, way, way more difficult than it was 20 years ago.
Yes,
to run and manage a small business. So the bureaucracy around things, I'm not even going to get into the Brexit thing, but this is a global...
just don't mention the B word, okay?
No. But this isn't just an EU thing. This is a UK thing. It's an EU thing. It's a worldwide thing because the laws of how everything works worldwide haven't caught up with the fact that everything is global now.
Yeah.
And as a result, they're putting in all these interim little measures and fixes without really thinking them through. And all of these little interim measures and fixes, they're crippling for small businesses, but do very, very little to resolve the overarching problem of giant conglomerates who are now bigger than countries.
Exactly, and all these MPs who vote on this stuff, they witter on about how it isn't onerous for a small. What do they know what onerous is? They don't even open their own post, for goodness sake.
Well,
people to do that, which we pay for, by the way.
And that's if they understand the legislation in the first place.
Quite.
So
quite.
It's very frustrating. I wish the powers that be would listen to shows like this and get a better understanding of how difficult it really, really is. We constantly get people getting in touch with the show saying, we want to charge more, but we can't charge anymore because customers don't want to pay anymore. Mm-hmm. But if I don't charge anymore, I might as well just shut the business down.
Yeah.
And because I can't physically make any money with the rates that I'm currently charging.
Yep.
And then, working 20-hour days and all that sort of thing. And I'm hearing it across the board. Yes, we're unbelievably busy, but we're not making any money.
We're not making any money, yeah. And it is easy to say, well, charge more, do, up your game, go, market yourself to a wealthier type of customer. Well, all those other customers still need stuff doing. And as much as we would like to only work for rich folks, the reality is we don't all live in that world, and all people from all walks of life need stuff doing. I got my bookcases delivered and installed yesterday, finally. My 3 little fluted frame bookcases that have been sort of rumbling on for a while. If you caught up with me on Instagram, you'll have seen it was a job full of mistakes, this particular thing.
Are you allowed to talk about that job? Or?
I'm allowed to talk about it, but not, not
the end user.
No, I can't really say. But it's a prominent house in London, one of several, which is, you have to go through very rigorous security controls to get in there. And it actually went in and fitted in absolutely perfectly. Thankfully, I was on the drive over there. I was dreading it, to be perfectly honest, because, oh Lord, I've had so many problems with this job. And even though there are only 3 relatively small bookcases, to get them in there, I've got to carry them up, 3 flights of stairs, and you can't park close by, and you've got to go round and through a courtyard and all this sort of stuff. And if they didn't fit, it would be just I'd have to carry them all out again above anything else. It would be a nightmare. But it was the easiest, most straightforward install I think I've ever done. They just sort of slotted straight in. And remarkably, for such an old property, dates back to the 1500s, the walls were all over the place, but the floors were really straight and level, so didn't even have to chock any of the feet up or anything. It was all, they just sort of went in and out. Although I did have a moment, there are 3, again, this job's been a long time in the making, has been rubbling on for a long time, and, you can't always remember what you had planned in your mind's eye for what the reality is when you get there. So I got there and I thought I put one of the bookcases in just to make sure, because these are going in where there's an angle. It's in a roof space, an attic apartment kind of thing. And the angle of the roof comes in and there are dormer windows. So a couple of bookcases in one of these dormers and one in another. And I had, from memory, I had these set that the bookcases filled the dormers. And when I got there, these dormers are huge. It's a big house, and then I realised there's a socket as well. Crikey, I hadn't allowed for the socket cut out. And then I realised that what I'd done was we decided, because they're going to be bookcases, you don't want a socket cut out in the back of a bookcase. I'd actually come to one side of the bookcase, of the socket, and the second bookcase, when it was butted against it, centred within the overall dormer. So that made sense. And then the other one just fitted in neatly, because there was a table in a corner. We had to come around that. So it all worked out fine, and it was absolutely the easiest install. But you still have that moment where I don't care how many times you've done this, and I'm sure you get this too. For the first time you offer something up into position, there's always that slight butterflies in the stomach, that slight heart in the mouth moment where you think, oh, is it going to fit?
Definitely, is it going to work? Definitely. And especially, depending on how much you've had to scribe certain bits of it. if it's a flat top on a unit or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, you might have templated it and got the scribe perfect and everything, but depending on the shapes of the walls, sometimes it can't be slid in. It's got to be kind of lifted in at an angle and dropped down, and then you've run into kind of other problems. Is it going to hit this? And what if there's a bump in the wall higher up that it hits when you're trying to slide it down? And yeah.
And again, when I first offered this one up, it looked like there was an awful lot of space. God, I've made it too short. There's loads. The idea of making furniture that fits is that it kind of fits in the space. And I'd offered this one up, and it looked too short. There was a good 3 or 4 inches above the top to where the crease line is on the wall where the roof comes in. But in fact, when I offered the other one up alongside it, that crease line comes way down the wall, so it's obviously a big bow in the roof, and that's what I'd measured off, thankfully. So because again, that's the kind of thing that could have caught you out so easily. You measure one end and not the other, and suddenly you've got a bookcase that's too tall, which is even worse than one that's too short. Yeah, but it all fitted fine. Customers happy, paid up straight away, and all was well. I came home with a smile on my face and a relatively empty workshop, which is really nice. But yeah, this job's been very difficult. I had all kinds of problems on it, mostly of my own making. I did a video about this a couple of weeks ago. I screwed up the cut lists. I had the tops cut to the wrong size, which is entirely my fault. I just didn't think it through properly. And then while I was making it last week, I cut the shelves to the wrong size. There's lots of this on Instagram. You follow me on Instagram. I'm at 10 Minute Workshop on Instagram. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Measuring Up Podcast, and follow Andy on Instagram as well at Gosforth Handyman. We post a lot of this sort of stuff there. It's short form pictures and that kind of thing, so it suits this sort of stuff very well. But I had all kinds of niggles with this thing. I cut the shelves the wrong size, so I had to remake all of those. And then I had, I think it was 21, 23, because I made 2 spares, fluted face frames, sections of these, and I cut all the upright ones to the wrong pencil line as well. I was working over the weekend to get it done. So it was just one of those jobs, but eventually it got done. I turned the workshop into a spray booth, got it all painted, and that all worked out fine, and I got it fitted yesterday, and I can, walk away from that with all the regret of a man scraping mud off his boots, as the saying goes.
It's always a nice feeling, though, when you know it's done and the customer's happy and the workshop's cleared out and you can now do a bit of a tidy up and catch up with stuff and get ready for the next job, and it's kind of a nice feeling. And
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's what I wanted to get this done, not just because I wanted to get paid, obviously, but because we're actually away. We've been away by the time you listen to this podcast, but we're away next week. So I wanted to get the workshop squared away and settled down, and I still haven't opened the boxes of my CNC yet, so I'm trying to have a rummage through those this afternoon and see what's in there.
Awesome. So the CNC is actually coming out today then, that's it?
Well, we'll open the boxes and see what's in there, I think, and see what's involved. But it's all good, and I've got a decent chunk of work when I come back. And of course, I'm getting myself slightly organised for Maker Central as well. Maker Central, May the 11th and 12th, we'll be there with the podcast stand G25. Come and say hello. Podcast stand is part of the podcast sort of promotion, but we'll be there promoting ourselves as well as 10 Minute Workshop and as Gosforth Handyman as well, of course. And we'll have all kinds of stuff for you to buy, because we do need to try and mitigate the costs of this. Yeah, try and fund this as well. I think there's probably a video to be made in the overall costs of putting on a show like this, putting on having a stand at a trade show.
It's really
like
quite a lot.
Yeah, it is. When you start looking into it, it's there's a cost of the stand, which is not inconsequential, but everything else as well, like banner advertising and populating the stand with tables and whatever else. Hotels, we've got to get stuff there, accommodation.
You start adding it up, and then you kind of think, I'm going to stop adding this up now, because you don't want to think about it anymore. But we're looking forward to it. It should be good. We're going to try and do a little bit of recording while we're there as well. So
yeah, so we're getting ourselves all sort of organised, or at least I am starting to get. I know you've been organised already, naturally.
Oh, I'm still nowhere near.
I've been dragged screaming and kicking into the 20th century. I have a contactless payment card reader now, which is terribly exciting. I've no idea how it works. I had to take a payment, but
they are awesome.
I've got it, and it's connected and to my bank account and all that sort of stuff. So I need to read through some more instructions or get some lessons or something.
I'm thinking of doing a video about it actually, because I've been running these for quite a long time, and they are great, and there's so much you can do with them.
You must know a couple of the tips.
I mean, there's not a lot to it really. You know, once you've got the app on your phone, but obviously you want to customize the invoice template and stuff, so it's got your logo on and stuff. You don't have to do that. But.
Okay. I mean, mine. I mean, I know we're not going to mention them by name, because if they want to mention, they can flip and pay for some advertising.
Exactly.
But the one I've got, it just opens to a library, and I'm not sure what you're supposed to do with that. Are you supposed to put rates and things in there?
No, you don't have to do that. I don't. You can set up products and stuff, but I don't do that. I just put in the price and the description, and I'll just put the customer's address as a description, and that does the job for me.
Okay.
But you can.
I haven't had a look at that at all.
If you sell actual products, then to save you having to type in the same product name all the time, you can add that in your product list, and then it's pre-populated and has a price. And
so that might be useful for Maker Central if we're selling pencils or whatever. Tape measures.
For that sort of thing, it's perfect. For jobs where almost every job is different, it would take far too long. You'd be standing on the customer's front doorstep. I'll just type in all the details. So I just put their address as a description, and then just charge them however much. And it just works flawlessly, really. And
cool.
I've had one time where I didn't have an internet connection, and the customer.
But that was with your old phone, Andy. Now you got your new phone. It's all going to be totally different.
It was, yes. So obviously that won't happen now. But the customer very kindly let me just temporarily hook onto their Wi-Fi to use theirs.
Oh, cool.
And that was the only time that I've ever had a problem, because you do have to have an internet connection.
Yeah.
But these days, mobile phones generally always got an internet connection. But they work really, really well. I mean,
the time was, of course, when these card readers, you couldn't buy them, you had to rent them, which is a real con. And then you got charged by, if you were a retailer, you'd have to have a rental thing, and then you got charged every time you use them, and then you get charged again when you get the money transferred into your account and all that sort of stuff. Whereas
I think you'd still do. I think
you still do. Yeah, there'll be charges applied. Yeah, but at least now you can buy the things outright, and everybody has a deal on them where they're going for about 20 quid.
Yeah,
which is it's got to be worth having, hasn't it?
Oh, I think it's amazing. I mean, for 20 quid, as I say, before you'd be renting the card reader for maybe £40 a month.
Yeah.
And then you'd be paying crazy fees on top of that.
Yeah.
And now you can just buy the card reader outright for 20 quid, and then you pay a much smaller fee.
Yeah.
Which you just make sure that it's
a percentage, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's just a small percentage of the value of the sale, basically. But when you add up how much the card operator is getting, it's not a lot.
The idea is that
they're having to do in the back end, you know what I mean, for cover the cost of the card reader about anything else.
But then, of course, they've got lots of people like us who are using them, so that's
it's a volume thing, isn't it?
The back end is once it's built, it doesn't cost anything to add another user, does it?
Yes, exactly,
or very little.
A bit like Patreon, which interestingly, that is what sent me down the rabbit hole of looking into the whole
of Moss,
Moss thing.
So are you looking at alternatives as well? Because I am too. Yeah,
well,
we get supported very generously through Patreon, and thank you very much to all our wonderful Patreon supporters. You can support the podcast, of course, through Patreon at patreon.com/measuring up podcast. And increasingly, Patreon don't take that much. They take more than the card issuer, for example, takes on these contactless payments.
They don't take anywhere near as much as YouTube, put it that way.
No, let's put it that way, absolutely. But at the same time, you see the amount of donations that we receive, and then you see how much we get, and it's a big old chunk.
Well, my frustration with it was when they started charging VAT, because I could never understand that, because it was like, well, hold on, you're an American company, why are you charging VAT? And anyway, I'm not VAT registered. If I went to these people directly and said, can you donate and I'll give you access to extra content, I wouldn't be charging VAT because I'm below the VAT threshold. It's only because it's having to go via Patreon that basically there's no option but for the VAT to come through. And that's what got us into digging into this, and it's because of this whole EU VAT MOS thing, the digital access to digital content, digital services, that Patreon have to charge VAT. That's why they are doing it. So there's basically no way out of it unless I set up effectively my own Patreon, because any other payment provider would have to do the same thing.
To do the same thing, yeah.
So the only way I can do it is if I completely bypass the middleman of Patreon and set up my own, whether it's a membership portal or some sort of restricted access thing. But then I'd have all the management of it.
Yes.
And I don't know if it would be worth it for the extra little bit I would. Well, I mean, it's 20%.
Yeah, it is. It's a fair.
And it's 20. It's not just 20%, but it's 20% that I'm not having to pay. It's 20% that you, as our supporters, are having to pay, and you are very kindly paying. And it's just it's out of our control, and there's literally nothing we can do about it. It's EU legislation that came in, as I say, in January, and any company in the world selling services into the EU has to charge it for digital services. And as I say, it's very interesting, the number of smaller businesses that you buy digital plans from and stuff like that aren't charging VAT and should be charging VAT, who, as I say, are probably just blissfully unaware.
Quite possibly, yeah.
They should be jumping through these
flaming hoops, yeah.
So I don't know. At the moment, it does the job, and I have no intention of changing it because it works very well, the Patreon thing. I think they need to be very careful of that. They don't do very much for the money, you know.
Well, other than they've built the back end to
they built a platform. Yeah. The other thing as well is that I think we're regarded as legacy Patreon people, like, and they're bringing out new things where anyone setting up new accounts on Patreon, they're going to end up paying higher fees and charges and things.
Oh, right, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, I literally just got a notification through today about that. I'd heard about it on the grapevine.
Right.
And I got this notification saying that they're bringing out some new tier, but don't worry, it won't affect you because you're a loyal,
long-term.
I can't remember what the term was, but it was basically a way of saying anyone new joining Patreon's going to pay more.
Yeah, strange.
To make the systems better and more secure.
Of course it will. Yeah, I still find Patreon messaging to be a real mess. I find the app thoroughly confusing. Especially with regard to messages, because you finding how to reply to somebody as a message rather than writing a new comment is very, very unclear. I used to work for a guy who always swore that the problem with traffic signs in towns was that they were always put in by people who knew where they were going, and what he meant by that was that you'd come to a point and you really need a sign to say, Old Town this way.
Yeah.
But because everybody knows where the Old Town is, they didn't have that. Whereas if somebody actually doesn't know where they're going, plans this, then you get a different approach to it all. And yeah, it's I find it very awkward to use. I think I've said before that Patreon is just about the only thing where I go running back to the to a web browser on my actual computer rather than using the app.
Yeah, I generally only use it in the web browser. I do occasionally accidentally click on a notification on my phone and it brings me into the app, and then I'm like,
well, what do I do?
I don't know what it makes no sense.
I'm not alone in that either. We did get a little bit of feedback, a little bit of follow-up from, I don't know if I can name him, but so yeah, I did have a little bit of follow-up on that, a little bit of feedback from Michael. He said he's loaded Patreon onto his phone and registered online. However, he's been unable to find us. I found the app, but it's not very user-friendly. Tell me about it. So regrettably, he's deleted the app and everything with it. Continue to listen to your podcast with interest. I don't know if you can use the... I thought the app was for the creator side of it, isn't it? Or can you use the app to...
No, I think it's for the... If you just want to watch content of people who you support, then you can use the app. Yeah. I don't know. Normally you would just search.
I don't know, because every time I use it, it logs me in, and it goes straight to my creator page rather than a user page. So I don't.
Yeah, I'm presuming you can just use it as a normal user. Same here. Obviously, it goes straight onto our creator page since we've got that.
Exactly.
But I'm assuming if I don't know, let us know on Twitter or via. Or via Patreon.
Via
Patreon. Don't let us know via Patreon.
No, we'll never see it.
The Patreon comment system, it's really hard to track.
It is.
New comments coming in. So if we do take a while to get back to you on Patreon, don't worry, we will eventually catch up.
Yeah.
It's really jumbled up how we see things from our end. So sometimes you'll get notifications in for certain things several times, and then you'll get no notifications at all for other comments, and it'll be like, oh, when did they post that? I've heard nothing about that.
Yeah.
And you'll go on and you'll find it hidden away somewhere, and then we kind of catch up. But so yes, bear with us on Patreon comments. We will catch up. But having said all of that, please, 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 please continue to support the show via Patreon, because it is basically the only way that we've got at the minute of supporting the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And you might think that two blokes sitting around a microphone talking doesn't cost anything. Well, it costs us plenty in terms of time and effort. And Andy takes ages to edit the podcast, mostly because we talk too much. But there's a lot of time and effort gone into this.
The back end side of things for the podcast is huge, and so thank you to everyone on Patreon. You are literally helping to keep the lights on, and without that, I'll say right now, the show wouldn't exist. So the folk on Patreon, even if you're just putting in a dollar, every dollar counts.
Absolutely.
And it just helps us keep the show running. So if you just go to patreon.com/measuringuppodcast, and you get access to the exclusive after show on that, where we talk about secret things, and it and then
don't talk about the secret thing,
and it just helps us to keep the show running, because there's literally no other way that we can keep the show running at the minute, because one of the problems is that in the UK, podcasts are a relatively new thing. And a lot of marketing departments at big companies haven't quite caught up with what podcasts are. And as such, finding sponsors for a show like this is very difficult, because you're having to kind of teach them what a podcast is before you can even explain why sponsoring it would be a good idea, and it's a highly targeted marketing. And
absolutely. All that. Early on, I had a conversation with the head of marketing at a major tool company to see if we were chatting about stuff for the YouTube channel, and I mentioned the podcast, and the head of social media at a significant tool brand had never listened to a podcast. So that's the kind of uphill battle.
That's the marketing people
we've got.
So then they have to sell it to like the powers that be.
Yeah, that's right.
So if the marketing people don't know what a podcast is, then the people who actually sign the check just turn around and say, oh, well, I don't know what that is. No, we'll just stick with traditional methods.
Yeah.
And it's really, really short-sighted, and it's very frustrating, especially when you see certain companies where the people who listen to this show would probably love to hear a little sponsorship slot from, I'll not say who, but people who, it's the exact people who would buy stuff from that shop
from them.
And it would mean not always pointing people to the likes of Amazon and things.
Yeah.
And then you get in touch and they're just like...
Exactly.
No, we don't really know what a podcast is, not interested.
And the other thing, of course, although we are a relatively small niche kind of podcast, it is very specialised. We have a highly motivated and very, very interested audience for these types of products. And if you want to reach that audience that is highly focused and very targeted, that normally costs an awful lot of money. You know, to market yourself to an audience like that, you'd normally use the sort of scattergun approach. So you blunderbuss your marketing money over a much wider range, whereas you could actually be much more sort of laser focused by concentrating on an audience like ours, the guys who are extremely interested in your product. Anyway, that's enough for the commercial for our podcast.
Well, if you do happen to know people in marketing departments at big companies, and we're not specifically talking about this show, but podcasts in general, do spread the word about what podcasts are. And if you want to keep this sort of thing going, obviously there's a cost to that. And just spread the word, just spread the word about the show, spread the word about what podcasts are to people, because there's a lot of, I would say probably the vast majority of people sitting in the UK are still blissfully unaware of what a podcast is. Well,
I know as well that we've introduced some of our audience to podcasts by starting this podcast. I know that because of the feedback we've had, that some listeners, this is the first podcast that they've listened to.
Yeah.
And as a result, they've gone on to find others. So, we're fighting the good fight for podcasts everywhere.
Exactly. So spread the word, tell everyone about this show, and tell everyone about podcasts, and then they can all be drawn in and addicted like I am, and we are.
Yes, there are so many. So, yes, what are we talking about this week? Do you want to go for some feedback?
Well, I had a really good message back from Karam, and I would just like to thank Karam for the message about the whole covenants on new build houses. And
oh yes, I saw that.
Yeah,
that came into the show email. You can email us, of course, contact@measuringuppodcast.com. We'll get an email to us. We had a few good emails actually. You go on with the one from Karam.
Yeah, well, I'll not go into the detail because it's quite legal speak, and well, he's put it across in a very easy to understand way, but we talked about it on a show a couple of episodes about,
which is just as well for us.
yeah, and it was all about the fact that are we kind of blindly running into a society where no tradesman can own a van because it's excluded in the covenants of every new build house that's getting created.
Yeah,
that you're not allowed to park vans on your own property, on the driveway or on the estate or anywhere. And eventually, obviously, more and more new builds were really, really limiting the options for where tradesmen can live.
Yep.
And I don't understand how. And Cram was saying that it's certainly a legally enforceable thing. It's a very complex area, and whether or not the developers or whoever the kind of owns the covenant, whether or not they would actually bother to enforce it is another whole matter. But the point is that it shouldn't be there in the first place. It's crazy to say. I mean, what we're basically doing is creating a society that doesn't have any tradespeople.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably you have to have your van parked outside your house at the end of the day.
I wish I could park my van outside my house. We've got residence parking, and fortunately we're allowed to have two vehicles for residence parking. Otherwise, I'd have to have a business permit, which costs a lot of money. And I mean, basically it's residence parking, so I pay for a permit for the immediate area, and it gives me the right to park a vehicle in one of those bays for an annual fee, a few £100 a year.
But you can park a van there.
But yes, I can park the van. Yeah. There's no restrictions on the actual vehicle. Yeah. I think there are height restrictions, so you can't park a bus, for example.
Which is fair enough, And I think you have to draw a line, but the line seems to be massively against tradespeople, the way things are going, and I can't understand how it's legal. Surely it's against... I mean, I understand how the covenants are legal, and I understand how they're enforceable, but I would love to know whether or not it's ever been enforced and ever been fought against, because surely there's some sort of human rights violation going on that tradespeople aren't allowed to have vans if you live in a new build estate anymore. It just seems crazy.
Seems crazy.
Coming back to what we were saying at the beginning of the show about all these little restrictions and little bits of bureaucracy that are creeping in across the board, and it just makes it's eventually we're not going to have any tradespeople in this country, and it's all these little things that are all adding up to make one great big not a problem, but a great big kind of area that people just don't want to work in because there's too many restrictions. And
yeah.
So interesting. Thanks for the feedback on that side of things. Really interesting. If anyone ever hears about whether this has ever been enforced, about people not being allowed to park their van outside their own house due to covenants on the property, would love to hear more about that, because I think that's criminal. Anyway, what else have we got?
We've got some great feedback, just some general positive feedback from Ryan, who says, "Just wanted to drop you a line to thank you for a great show. He's in the process of catching up, and he's covering on the Christmas 2018 show, so not too far to go, Ryan. Slowly working towards building his own garden workshop, and the advice that we have offered has been invaluable during the planning. So excellent. Hoping to make it to Maker Central in May. Will definitely stop by the stand and say hi. That's stand G25 at Maker Central. Looking forward to seeing you there, Ryan."
And we got a lovely note from Andrew. I'm not sure if he wanted us to mention his second name, so I'll just say Andrew. And he's really, really kindly sent me and Peter a couple of Kindle ebooks. So thank you so much for that, Andrew. That is absolutely awesome. And it was all down to, we were chatting about, I think I mentioned, how much do you think I'm making from this channel? And taking on staff to help do the editing and all that sort of thing. And,
that's right.
And he mentioned
the thumbnails,
Life Leverage by Rob Moore, and saying that we should have a read of it. So, and he sent us a couple of Kindle ebooks. So thank you so much for that, Andrew. I will.
That's very generous of you. Thanks, Andrew. That's fantastic. I'll get that downloaded. In fact, I've had that downloaded onto my Kindle. I'll have a good read of that on my flights when I'm going away soon. So yeah, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, the only chance I generally get to read is on holiday, and it's similar to yourself. And you were saying you probably read it on the flight or something, and that's kind of one of the rare moments where you've got no other distractions. You can't go on the internet. You can't check YouTube comments, and and I do enjoy a good book when I'm on holiday, and that's, other than that, I never get a chance to read. I don't know about you, but I very rarely get a chance to read.
I've usually got a book on the go, and I usually snatch sort of 10 minutes of an evening. It's my kind of, in bed, just read for 10 minutes, just to blot out everything else. The crazy sort of circus of ideas that runs around my head when I get into bed and start going to sleep, or trying to get to sleep. Suddenly all these sort of YouTube ideas keep flashing up, and the crazy circus carnival of madness. So yeah, it's good to have a quick read of something else just to try and dampen those down a little bit. But other than that, no, it's mostly, as you say, flights, being a passenger somewhere, or wherever, anywhere where we don't have to concentrate too much on where we're going. It's quite nice just to be able to pull out a book and have a quick read.
Have you done many audiobooks?
No, I found they get in the way too much. I've got two problems with them. First of all is the narration. Whoever's reading it can change, for me anyway, can completely change the character of a book. So that's probably me just being picky. But I've had some books that were so badly read, they just put me off completely. And some of them are, sometimes they're almost like plays, and they're dramatized. You get, sound effects and doors closing and, floorboards creaking or whatever it is, which I find off-putting. I quite like the BBC do Radio 4 radio plays as audiobooks, which are quite good. So it's almost like it's a performance, but it's made for radio, so it's designed to be listened to.
Yeah.
But audiobooks, not so much. I usually need to, if I'm doing something else, I want to be doing something else rather than listening to a book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I certainly think listening to them in the workshop's just not doable, because there's too much dipping in and out every time there's a tool running, and
exactly.
just kind of keeping the thread running. My major problem with audiobooks is I just fall asleep while listening to them. As soon as I put one on, I find it so relaxing, I just nod off, and that's fine when you're on the beach, but when you're driving...
Yeah, not so good.
It's not so safe. I like the idea of audiobooks, but yeah, every time I've tried one, lying on the beach or something, I've just nodded off, and then it's like, where did I get to? And yeah, need some sort of detector where it just stops when you fall asleep.
That's right. At least with an ebook, you don't lose your page. Whereas with an audiobook, it just keeps playing whether you're awake or not.
My wife's an avid Kindle reader and fully embraced the technology when it came out, and to the point of wanting to basically ditch every single book in the house. And it's like, well, can we keep the nice ones? It's like, yeah, but I'm never going to read a real book again. And literally for the last, since Kindles were invented, and she reads a lot.
Yeah.
And she just loves the Kindle. She wouldn't be without it. But too many adverts for Amazon. Good grief.
Well, yeah. There are other ebooks readers are available, although Amazon's the big dog because it was the first one. I was a big ebook fan, but again, Amazon was the first one that had the actual content and the hardware together in the same place at the same time. Whereas before the Kindle came along, it was a real battle to get books that worked with your device. It's crazy. So yeah, big fan of Kindles as well. And I mean, we used to take, when the kids were little, I think we took the entire Harry Potter series of books with us in physical form on a holiday once and left them there because we couldn't be bothered to bring them back. And it was, we'd literally have suitcases full of books.
Yeah.
Because me and my wife both read a lot, certainly for holidays. Yeah, it's not, easily do a book a day, sometimes more. So you'd end up taking sort of 16 books each with you. They're not coming back. Not carrying those in two directions.
Yeah.
So it was nice to be able to have everything in one thing, as long as, of course, you don't lose it, break it, or drop it in the pool. Then you're really stuffed because you lose all your books. Rather than just having a damp one.
As I say, I don't read. I just don't have time. I think when I get into bed at night, and I'm in the bad habit of that, tends to be my only chance to catch up on Twitter and Instagram and stuff like that, which is bad really, because it means I'm basically working in bed until I then fall asleep with the phone on my head, and your brain you fall asleep with your brain still in work mode, which probably isn't good. Anyway, so woodworking. This show's about woodworking, isn't it?
We need to talk about that.
Let's talk about. Here's an interesting one. Do you view yourself as a joiner or a cabinet maker or a carpenter?
Oh, goodness. Those are such ancient names, aren't they? Ancient categories.
Because I sometimes get people commenting and getting really wound up about the fact that, it goes both directions. Sometimes I get people saying you shouldn't be referring to yourself as a handyman, because you're a cabinet maker, and then I have to explain, the handyman thing is my YouTube thing, my business is a cabinet maker, joinery business, and then they're fine with that. And then you get other people who say you shouldn't be calling yourself a joiner, you're a cabinet maker, and then you get other people saying you're not a joiner unless you make things out of proper joints, and then
proper wood.
Yeah, and all you're doing is butt joints and MDF, so therefore you're not a joiner, and it's you get all this,
and you're not a cabinet maker because all you make are cabinets. It's I mean, in case it isn't clear, traditionally a carpenter would be somebody who felled the trees and roughly dressed them and maybe planked them. A joiner would be somebody who took those planks and made them into, joined them together to make doors or windows or whatever else. And a cabinet maker would be somebody who did the finer, more detailed work, like housings for grandfather clocks or cabinets for your home.
But then, to complicate matters further, a carpenter, and it varies depending where you are in the world, but a carpenter would fit the things that a joiner has built.
Yeah.
So a carpenter would typically do the on-site stuff, and the joiner would typically do the workshop stuff. But again, that terminology seems to vary.
Yeah. And then we get into the whole thing about master carpenter, because master carpenter it's not a recognised term in Britain, whereas in the US and elsewhere, it is. It's a whole mess. I tend to call myself a woodworker.
Yeah, I just don't get
if we're being picky about it.
Hung up on it.
I don't get hung up on it. No, I don't either. It's people misuse the terms all the time. If you are a time-served cabinet maker, then I can understand why you might get uptight about somebody who simply butt joints MDF or uses a domino, calling themselves a cabinet maker. But to be honest, we are entitled to do that. There is nothing to stop me saying that. I'm not suggesting I'm a time-served cabinet maker, other than the fact that I've been doing it for a long time. I haven't. We've said we have no formal qualifications in this.
You could work with a master craftsman for 20 years, and not get any kind of badge at the end of it, but you would, you wouldn't be time served because you haven't got that little tick in the box from a very rich qualifications authority who are all commercial entities at the end of the day. But okay, we're going down that. I don't want to go down that rant.
I feel we've done the apprenticeship thing once or twice already. So yes, I mean, I call myself a carpenter and cabinet maker because those are terms that most people recognise. I don't think many people really make the distinction. Many punters, many customers or clients really make the distinction these days certainly between carpenters and cabinet makers. Maybe joiners, they may realise that if you want a door made or a window, then you go to a joinery. But I call myself whatever I can, really.
Yes, I think it's interesting that the terms are so differently used across the planet, and depending on where you are, even where you are in the country. And as I say, folks saying, if you're making cabinets and stuff, you're not a joiner. And it's like, well, I know many joinery companies who call themselves joiners who do nothing other than make fine oak furniture.
Yeah.
And they call themselves joiners. So, and then you've got like furniture maker and stuff like that comes into the equation. And
well, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's not something to get hung up about, have pride in your work and do a good job, and the proof's in the pudding. Develop your portfolio.
Yeah, I mentioned in a video that I did about the domino, and I mentioned that some people get a bit snippy about if you're using tools like dominoes to do the joining for you, and they get a bit sneery about, it's just a production machine, as if production is a dirty word kind of thing. I had a great comment on that video from a genuine, honest to goodness, time served cabinet maker who said that he uses a domino all the time and he thinks it's fantastic. It's a modern production tool, just like hand planes were once modern production tools. It's just a natural progression, the same as a big sort of industrial planers and things replaced hand planes for a lot of that sort of work. It's just things move on. Not everything can stay mired in the past. People will, of course, use whatever current production methods are that are applicable of the day.
Things move on in terms of tools and methodology and the materials that we're using. MDF, obviously, which, that's another whole debate.
It's not wood. Of course it is. It's made of recycled phone books. I've actually read that on a there was a podcast. I think I tagged you in on that, didn't I? Yes. Admittedly, it was quite an old one, and dear me.
But again, MDF quality varies so much around the globe. You can understand why it's got a bad name in areas where you can't buy good MDF. Oh, here's a...
Have you got any MDF stories this week, Andy, by the way?
I have got an MDF story, a little MDF story.
What do you know?
Which, you know how... I'm not going to give a shout-out to the giant orange box shifter store, who it's your UK equivalent of your Lowe's and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But we were chatting about some of the stores selling Medite, and a decent brand.
Yeah, we saw that.
And I have an interesting fact surrounding that.
Oh, okay.
They were selling Chronospan.
Right.
The trouble is, it's not public, unless you see the shipment come in. The label on the piece of wood says made by ... Limited, which is some subsidiary of the box shifter.
Okay.
But it's not made by them. So the shipments of Chronospan in this big store, and then I noticed underneath the shipments of Chronospan were great big pallets of Medite. And I had a chat with someone there saying, I see you've got a big stack of Chronospan there and Medite underneath it, as if that's the thing waiting to come next. Are you in the process of switching over to Medite? And they said, yes.
Interesting.
So it looks like, but they don't do MR. So it doesn't really resolve any problems. I did say, are you going to be getting moisture resistant in? And they said, oh yeah, we'll be doing that. And it's like,
you don't know what it is.
I'll believe it when I see it, because I don't think, I'll believe it when I see it. But it's standard trade MDF, but it's still good stuff, but it's not the MR stuff.
You shot me a message in the week to say, are you going crazy, or does 6mm MR MDF actually exist? Because you've been running around trying to find some.
Oh yeah.
And
what was the verdict on that?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you readily buy 6mm MR?
Yeah, I sent you a picture back of me holding some.
Nowhere up here has it, to the point that
6mm MR MDF Medite. I can walk into my local yard and get as much as little as I want.
Well, you know my story. I don't want to shout out and badmouth the suppliers up here, but yeah, the last supplier that I spoke to who did do normal 18mm, and I was trying to get the 6mm off them, said that 6mm MR doesn't exist. And I was like, I'm sure it does, but oh well, there you go. And that's from the timber merchant. Yeah,
crazy. I have to say, I know I'm very fortunate that I've got a really good yard, local to me, who are still in business. If they chose to close down and sell the site, that'd be worth an awful lot of money. So I'm just so happy that they're still happy to be in the timber business. But I've got a neighbour a couple of doors down from me, a workshop neighbour, who's a precision engineer, and his metal stockholders just called it a day. There was a little metal stockholder in a little industrial estate just up the road a little way. And they're closing down. So,
for any particular reason, or do you?
The guy who owns it is in his 70s,
just retiring,
and just retiring. Yeah, is that enough?
Well, here's an interesting one. Talking about timber yards that could just sell up the land and make loads of money. You know, the timber yard that you were talking about last time that wouldn't cut MDF up here, and I didn't mention their name, but you read out the comment from someone
who came in through one of the comments. Yeah, that's right.
And someone went in and they refused to cut MDF because they didn't have. Well, they used the big C
gives you
word.
cancer and stuff. Yeah,
yeah.
That's right.
And anyway, I was there the other day, picking up some oak for a project, and I need to talk to you about that.
Yeah,
they are selling because they're pretty much in central Newcastle, and they're flogging the land and moving. So, they are literally doing that. They are upping sticks and flogging their plot and shifting. On the plus side, they're shifting to a much better location, and they said that it'll be almost like... I'm not holding my breath here, but they said that it'll be almost like a proper builder's merchant, but for timber, like a proper kind of drive-in. Because I know, like in Germany and stuff, you can physically drive your car into the big box shifters to if you want a whole load of wood, you can just drive your car into the
yard,
into the open section of the yard and just fill it up. Which imagine doing that here, and it just would never happen. Anyway, so they were, and I had a little chat. I didn't mention the podcast and stuff because sometimes that can get a little bit, not awkward, but I didn't want to embarrass them or anything. But I was asking about the MDF thing, and I think it's because they just generally don't do MDF. They're not really cut out for, they don't have proper dust extraction or anything like that, which they probably really should for all the other wood.
They should, all we'll say it again, all wood dust is hazardous.
Yeah.
But you should be using proper dust collection if you're cutting timber.
I think there are legal requirements if you are cutting MDF.
Yes.
And they don't meet those legal requirements.
Okay, fair enough, yeah.
For cutting MDF, and I think that's why. So I think the big C word was dropped in as probably an excuse for the fact that they don't have the dust extraction that they should have if they are going to be cutting that sort of material. Because the dust is nasty, but it's nasty because it's fluffy, very fine dust. Yeah.
So go on, tell you put a picture on Instagram about your little video, wasn't it, about your getting lengths of timber into your truck.
Oh yes.
And it was actual proper tree meat, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah.
What's that about? What are you doing? What are you up to?
It's a big alcove job that I've got coming up, and it's going to have solid oak tops on the lower units and solid oak shelves inside the. It's a great big alcove. You might be used to it where you are, but up here, I don't know what's the typical width of an alcove down in London. Do you know off the top of your head, or?
They vary. They vary so much. In fact, I'm going to have a look at one this afternoon, which is 1.75 meters.
Right. Well, this is 1.
Meter 70.
This is 1.65 per side or thereabouts.
And that's unusually wide.
It's really big.
Normally the widest is about 12.
So they're having floating shelves, and I was saying 1.6 meter floating shelves. You're kind of reaching your limits on. Even if I use, ply, a ply sandwich of softwoods and ply and all that sort of thing, you're reaching the limits of what that can handle.
You're going to need it, even with a steel front edge, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's going to be okay, because the way that I do my floating shelves, they are very, very rigid once it's sandwiched together in that kind of laminate of 3 layers and then glued and everything.
Yeah, well, when you think of the number of the length of the glue joint that has to fail for that to move, And
I've done longer floating shelves, but I think the longest I've done for a single span's been about 1.8 meters, but it's only been for storing shoes and lightweight things. Whereas in an alcove, where it could get used for a massive
books and whatever,
load of books or whatever, and I've just said, what we might have to do is put a centre support in if we find that it does start sagging over time.
Yeah.
I'd rather try it without, because I think it'll look better.
Yes.
And if you're not putting crazily heavy things on it, like vinyl and stuff like that, it'll probably be absolutely fine. It's just you are really on the border of what you can do in a single span without having either, as you say, either a central support or metal reinforcing and stuff like that. So we're going to see how it goes.
Yeah.
But that's not for the oak. Well, that's not what the oak's for, because we want the floating shelves to be white.
You can paint it?
And well, you could paint it, but the costs would just be staggering, you know. And as I say, I'd rather go down the route of seeing if it is a problem first, because if it's not a problem, then I know the people who are this is going in for, and it's quite a nice test case. And I've said to them, look, let's try it.
Yeah.
If it's a problem, I'll fix it. But I'm quite intrigued whether or not this particular design of shelf will handle it. I think it will handle it.
Okay.
And I think it'll be absolutely fine. But time will tell. So I shall feed back, because as I say, I know these people, so I can go back in a year's time and see if it's sagged at all. I don't think it will.
Good. Interesting.
The alcoves are so wide that you can't really do 2 cabinets per side, because you'd end up with the doors being almost landscape.
Yes.
So it's having to be 3 cabinets per side, which I've ended up going. They wanted wood storage for an open fire and all this sort of, for a wood burning stove.
All right.
So we've ended up going down the route of having 2 cabinets with shelves.
Right. Yeah, I got it.
Between them,
Yeah.
where they can store wood. So if you imagine cabinet, log storage, cabinet per side.
It.
So it basically splits each side into thirds rather than halves, because otherwise it just wasn't looking right. When I was putting it together on SketchUp, I really struggling to find a way of getting a 2 cabinet layout.
Yeah, sure.
Without the doors ending up being crazily wide. But it's one of those things, until you've had to play with it and kind of gone backward forwards a few times with a client. And this is the one that I'm actually going to be doing the SketchUp video at some point, just kind of chatting about some of the design decisions and trying different things. And it's like, just that doesn't look right. And then going backwards and forwards with the client. And then eventually we've settled on what they're happy with and what is practical to make.
Yeah.
But it's the widest alcoves that I've ever done.
Yeah.
It's not the widest floating shelf I've ever done, but it's the widest alcoves I've ever done. But as I say, normally they're 1.2 meters or thereabouts.
Yeah.
You know, they're not normally that wide.
What are you doing? Are you going to have shelves, bookcases all the way up, or so you've got a double either end of the alcove and a wood store in between? Have you got shelves above the wood store?
So the lower units are just your bog standard lower units with 3 things in each, and then floating shelves above. So three floating shelves per side.
Oh right, okay, got it.
Above the lower unit, but on one side they want a TV in, so I'm going to have to skip a floating shelf.
Okay,
and then you have to cater the whole design around fitting the TV in, but then you don't want the gap to be so huge that it makes the TV look tiny. So then you have to kind of cater that into the design and then work out, okay, that's how the TV is going to fit in, and the TV won't look ridiculous. So now we know what the spacing for the next shelf up is going to be, and then that has to match the shelf on the other side, but then we need a shelf an equal spacing below it, and then that determines the height of your next shelf above that. Do you know? So that all your shelf spacing's equal. So there's a lot of interesting design decisions, and then because we've got the wood storage, there's going to be logs constantly taken in and out, there can't be painted shelves because the paint will all just wear off. So hence the shelves where the logs are going on are all going to be solid oak. So that's what all the oak's for anyway. It's basically oak shelves in this unit, and then oak countertops type thing as well. So lots of glue ups. Which, if I had... I was
going to say, that oak looked pretty narrow, so...
It's 6 inch,
lots of glue in it.
It's 6 inch.
Oh, is it 6 inch?
So it's 3 boards per...
Yeah, that's not too bad.
Per shelf, which isn't too bad. They're not very deep, these alcoves, that's the other thing. They're only a foot deep.
Oh, right.
So they're really, really wide and really shallow.
And shallow, yeah, that's what this one is. I'm going to have a look this afternoon. Again, I've only been given dimensions on it, but 1750 wide, but 250 deep. So yeah,
so very similar by the sounds of it. But it's a beautiful room with all the original, ornate cornicing and all that sort of thing. So
stuff. Lovely.
I'm looking forward to seeing it all done. So I've got a lot, but the prep for this job, it's probably a week's install, but it's probably a week of prep. I mean, I was out for a day just picking wood up.
Yeah.
From various, because I had to go to one place for the ply, another place for the oak, the delivery, the MDF of it.
Yeah, and you can't get it all in the van at the same time. You've got to do separate journeys and all that sort of stuff.
No. Well, I had to get the MDF delivered. I had to go to had to get the ply cut up so that I could fit it in the truck. So I had to get that from a place that I know can do cutting, but they don't do the MDF. And they don't do the oak, so then I'm off to another place to get the oak. And so just picking the materials up took a full day. And then, as I say, I've got lots of glue-ups to do for the boards. So all of the prep will probably take best part of a week of prep, if you include all the delivery of materials and all that. So, but we'll see how it goes. I'm looking forward to it. I don't think I'll be able to film it.
No, that's the trouble, isn't it?
Once I get out on site, I just need to crack on with the job, and I haven't got. It slows you down.
Are you building it all on site, or are you painting as well?
No, they're going to get decorators in. Thankfully, okay. I'm not doing any finishing other than oiling the oak, because I always get really paranoid about leaving unfinished oak. That
especially with painters around,
and they've got young kids, and all it takes is for them to go around with a felt tip pen. There's 500 quid's worth of oak. Destroyed instantly, So I'll be putting a finish on the oak just to protect it. But then all of the actual painting, all the white, will be done by decorators. Thankfully, I don't have to do that.
Yes.
So next week I'll be doing all the glue-ups of the oak, building all the cabinets, building the doors, basically getting everything ready to take.
Yeah.
And because it's so big, I'm going to have to make a couple of journeys with all the gear. So I'll probably drop some of it off next week and then go for the following week to do the install, which I'll be starting on the day this podcast comes out.
Lovely.
So, so on the day this episode is released, I could sit there in the house listening to this. That's
fantastic. Happy times. Play it loud.
Yeah, I might not. I might not listen to myself. That would be weird.
That would be strange, wouldn't it?
Okay, well, we best wrap it up for today because we're past the 1.5 hours.
I think we better head,
Mark, and I've got some interesting stuff on the for the after show.
On the after show, excellent. Oh, well, look forward to hearing that. In order to access the after show, of course, you need to be a Patreon supporter. We want to go a quick shout out to all of our fantastic Patreon pals. Andy, you go first.
A massive thank you to Douglas Steele, Thistle Dew, Brendan at the Shades Workshop, Tim Bowers, Nick Fajardo, Adrian Millington, Chris Davison, Paul Gardner, Eddie Carroll, James Hewitt, Carl Pountney at the Strawbite Workshop, Steve Avery, Peter Tone, Owen Bullock, Tony Carnell, Adam Padley, Chris Mark Duthie, Max Viertz, Mark Duff and Ben Harker.
And I'd like to thank Harry Capper, John T. Lynch, Duncan, Chris Stokesmore, Ben Campbell from the Colonel Collective, Jason Williams, Wilson Chan, Kevin Steer, Dominique Kajinson, Andy Farmer, Randall Davis, David Chisnell, Kevin Miller, Piece of Timber, Andrew Marnell, James's Man Cave, Graham Bailey, Mike Broom, Rakesh Patel, Paul Cunningham and James Ian Wilson.
Music is Silver by Riot, and thank you everyone for listening. You can catch us now on the after show over on Patreon, and you can use our new fancy swanky RSS feed for Patreon as well, which hopefully you've managed to get that up and running and working.
Yeah, you certainly can. Please, if you have the time, give us a rating on iTunes. iTunes is the big dog in terms of rating and reviewing podcasts.
Yeah, and we've got nearly 200 5-star reviews on iTunes, so thank you everyone for that. Keep them coming in. It really helps kind of get the show out there, and it is fantastic. You can catch up with us online at Measuring Up PC on Twitter and at Measuring Up Podcast on Instagram. And how can we find you online, Peter?
You can find me in all the usual places. I am at 10 Minute Workshop on Instagram and at 10 Minute Shop on Twitter.
And I'm at Gosforth Andy on Twitter and at Gosforth Handyman on Instagram.
And of course, you can always email us, contact@measuringuppodcast.com. Will always reach us. That's it, though, for this week. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you over on the after show.
See you later.